So I'm going to ask you some of these questions, but I think just one of my reflections that all of you talked about was, or alluded to at least, was this work is really hard. It's not all fun and experimental and sexy. Quite a lot of the time it takes, iterating, working with people who are different to you takes a lot of time. And then the second thing I think that really came across with lots of you and came across with some of these questions here is that we all need to change the way we're working in this. The whitewashing idea, just doing a social innovation project doesn't mean that you're doing a social innovation project. It means changing your own practices. That's governments, it's other kinds of institutions, but it's our own practices as well that we need to sometimes change and adapt regularly to work with different kinds of institutions. And so I'm going to go with the question that had the emoji. There was only one of them. Thank you, whoever that was. And I'm going to first start the conversation around the relationship between governments and people, or governments and the way that you work. And someone actually said, this question said, what are the solutions to the mistrust between governments and people at the moment? But I'm going to extend that as well and say to you, what is the solutions of mistrust between governments and you? How do you work with them as well? Because it's not just citizens, you're going in a different relationship. And I'm going to start with you, Chelsea. You can use your own.
Hello. Are you more interested in the question of mistrust between government and the people, or between us and government?
Between you and government.
I actually don't find that government mistrusts us or that we mistrust government. We often have pretty rich early stage conversations with our potential government partners before we ever actually jump into having a partnership with them. And during that process, we ask a lot of questions of them. What is this? What are you going to do with it? How's it actually going to get rolled out? What are your intentions? And they ask a lot of questions about us so that they can tell whether or not we're actually going to do something useful for them. And I feel like often by the time we are really engaged in the meat of the work, we've worked out a lot of that stuff. And we actually have a project going on right now where we have no contractual agreement with our government partner. And our government partner, in fact, has hardly spoken with us since the day he called me up and told me that there was some significant amount of budget for us to go out and do this work. He said, Public Policy Lab, go do it, and then let me know. Because enough trust has been built up there from prior engagements that he actually he is requiring nothing from us in terms of reporting or documentation or project planning. And in fact, I'm harassing him. I'm like, hey, man, we have to talk about where this is going and what the next step is, And he's like, yeah, it'll be fine, But I actually feel like you can, the nature of the work is so richly collaborative. And our process is so dependent on our government partners working hand in hand with us that by the time we're done with one of the engagements, it's as if we have formed a team. And we're always very sad to say goodbye to one another.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm going to go to Suryani next, actually, and go back to the questions that's formed here around your views on the relationship between governments and people, because a lot of the work you do must be translating a little bit between governments or city officials or people in a place and people who are living in or using laneways, for example.
Local governments are not that friendly, like in New York, in Malaysia. I don't know whether it's it's just a different culture, but we do have very suspicious government and local governments and local authority, because I think there's a question of territoriality, because when you come in and in a way you're looked at as an organization that might encroach upon a government's role or a local authority's role, they feel threatened. And I think sometimes that's the case, that's the perception, if it's not the case. And we have to do a lot of work before we actually gain the trust of a local authority or mayor or government or the heritage commissioner of our government and our federal government or ministry. We find it's a lot of work of engagement, but we find that they respond quite a lot to offering of solutions, because when they have an issue and they don't know how to go about it, and when we say like, look, you can do it, but we can help you by providing, like, we know this technical expert and we will pay for the report to be done first, and then you see how it can be done better or cheaper or that would be more beneficial. We will do the cultural mapping and the consultation with the residents in the streets for you. So when you have that kind of, you're actually going to make our job easier, that's when they start becoming nicer and they allow us to do more and more. And then we end up doing half of their work. So that's not a great idea either, but that's a good start because there's trust, and we find that later our work becomes easier and easier with local authorities, and instead of us having to approach now state governments or local authorities in order to do something, they come to us and say, hey, we have this project, but we're not quite sure how to go about it because there's an area of conservation that needs to be done, and we don't have expertise in there, but you've done conservation heritage. Or there's a river, and we actually have a budget to clean the river, but we also need placemaking along the river. Can you help out with the placemaking when we clean the river? Or can you talk to this MP, or can you talk to the residents? So we offer to make things easier for them. And I think when we present ourselves as a partner, rather than like a competition or as a threat to their role, we don't want to usurp the government's role. We actually want to make their job easier and better. So I think we did a lot of things, including offering training and workshops for the people in planning department or the architects who work within government. We actually provided them conservation workshops, training, and we kind of did a lot of presentations on placemaking, on creative cities, on best standards for conservation. So they really see the value of you being there as a partner. So that's how we create trust when there's a situation. Like in Malaysia, usually the government doesn't really trust organizations outside the government. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's particularly helpful in this context as well, because it's going to be slightly closer in Malaysia than it is in other parts of this group. Carolyn, why don't I come to you next in the question around roles and responsibilities. So someone asked, what are the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders in doing this co-creation? And you work with lots of different people who are stakeholders at lots of different points of the system, lots of different ways of interaction. So how do you see the roles and responsibilities of these different stakeholders?
Yeah, interesting question, and I don't know if it's ever the same twice. I think the one part I would focus on is around how we are really leveraging the wisdom and expertise of our communities and our citizens, and what roles and responsibilities that they would have. I think there's a lot of sort of effort and energy in terms of co-design or co-creation at the moment going into sort of ethnographic research or semi-structured interviews around how you draw out the sort of insight and lived experience of people. But I think we need to go one step further now into actually seeing those people as part of the solution as well. So we are building more and more peer research teams now, where again, we actually recruit community members or people actually experiencing the challenges you're trying to make progress on as part of the team. So we might end up with a team working on a piece that's got public servants in it, some of our team in it, and then community members on it. And we pay those community members, and we really value their expertise and the wisdom that they bring. And we are, really pushing ourselves beyond just sort of extracting what they know and actually engaging them to help build and generate the solution itself. So that's probably the thing that I feel most passionate about in terms of roles and responsibilities at the moment. But obviously, how you create good spaces and ways of collaborating and sort of psychologically safe spaces for that to happen is really, really critical.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Can I just ask one more to Stefan, though? Just very quickly. So we're going to open the floor, but just there's another one here that I think is really interesting for Stefan. So maybe just a quick response on it. And I'm asking you this. I can't remember. I can't even find it anymore. But I saw it earlier on. I'm asking you this because I know we have lots of these conversations about the inside and outside of government. And someone asked, what would be the difference if a lab was opened inside government as opposed to outside government?
This is a famous inside-outside dilemma.
Famous question.
Just to sum up, when you're inside, you got the capacity, you're close to the power, but you got very few freedom. And when you're outside, you got many freedom, but you can't use it because you're far from the power. So this is the famous dilemma of labs. And what we think is that we must find a path in between. We must find the tactics and the strategy and the governance to create something that has 1 foot inside and 1 foot outside. And believe me, this is part of the job we try to do. In the end, we think that if we want change in the long term, you cannot stay totally outside. You really need a deep change in the core bureaucracy. So I would say in an ultimate goal, you need really to create capacity inside at the higher level as possible. And this is what we, during 10 years ago, for instance, we just had the capacity to work with project manager. And then 2 or 3 years later, then we were able to talk with top manager, and now we talk with the mayor, with the politician, and we feel that it's possible step by step to go deeper in the change. But just, you don't do it overnight. It takes time. And one of the problems we've got with administration is the political mandate. It's a cycle of, we would need 10 years, 8 years, 15 years to change things globally. But we just have the length of a mandate, 5 years, 7 years, 3 years, etc. So one of the main obstacles is this political cycle. It's not the same as the innovation, social innovation cycle. We need more time to do things in the long term. But I'm the one who promotes labs or equivalent teams at the core of bureaucracy at the end. I think we really need deep change and teams and capacity within the system. So we need many efforts from outside. We really need many more players, many more suppliers, many more social innovation labs than we have now. But at the end, I really think that we need to create capacity at the core of administration. I really believe that.
Thanks, Stefan. And Chelsea's just reminded me that Chelsea and Julio, who you'll hear from later on, have just done a webcast on this, which is this exact topic, which is available. And there are many other resources that we can share. So we can share them via Facebook and all of those things. We have time. I'm going to ask you all a question in a minute. I'm going to tell you what it is now so you can prepare, because you're all going to give me a 1-minute answer in this in a second. And please don't put it up on the slide, because it's probably not appropriate publicly. But the gist of it is that I'm going to ask you, what one thing can citizens do to push, or organizations do to push their local governments or their governments to do things differently? So I'm just going to leave that with you while I ask very quickly, just a 1-minute answer each, please. When I ask very quickly, does anyone in the audience have a burning question that they feel like they need to vocalize now? I emphasize the word question, not speech. Because you know what I didn't get to be a speaker, so I'm going to do my speech now. So anyone got a burning question that they feel like they need to ask? If a hand doesn't come up in the next 4 seconds, there is one. If someone will give you a microphone, if you could just say your name and the country that you're from, and it's just here, and your question, please.
I'm Sujata Gawada. I'm from India, but I've been based in Hong Kong for 24 years. Question for you, why did you get involved in what you're doing? Or what motivated you to do what you're doing?
I love that question. That's brilliant. And we're going to finish with that. And while you're formulating that answer to include it in your other question that I asked you, I'm also going to say that all the questions that are on Slido and all the questions that are in your head, you have an opportunity to get them out. Because what we'll do after the tea break this afternoon is an open space session, which is an opportunity for you to ask these questions and have clustered discussions around them. So they're not wasted. So, Ada's changed your 1 minute to 30 seconds. Why do you do what you do, and 1 minute, and one thing that people could do to push their governments to do things differently?
I think that one thing that politicians and senior civil servants are responsive to is the sense that other people like them in other places are doing things that people like, but that they themselves are not doing. Politicians and government officials are competitive. They want to be seen as being leaders and being effective. So in as much as citizens have the ability to raise in public forums precedents of things that are being done better elsewhere, that tends to get the blood up, as we would say, of the politicians and the civil servant leaders to have to respond to why they are not similarly creating progress or opportunities for their constituents.
And why do you do what you do, Chelsea?
Well, it keeps me off the streets. So that's important. I feel that it's endlessly intellectually and emotionally stimulating work. So selfishly, I derive a huge amount of emotional and intellectual satisfaction from digging into these complex systemic problems that are also profoundly rooted in people's emotional and physical experience of being bodies moving through the world. So as a professional, that's delightful. As a citizen, it offends me that all Americans do not have equal opportunity to live, as Carolyn says, their best life. And I feel like if I can put my effort in some way to addressing that, then that is as good a way as any of doing something useful in the world.
Thanks, Chelsea. Stefan.
So first the question about why I'm doing this.
Yeah, let's go with why you're doing this.
Yeah, there is an official and a non-official reason. So
Okay.
I'll give you both. I tell you the official one is that I'm a former civil servant, so I used to work inside these bureaucracies. So I have some empathy with bureaucrats and so on. And then I became a consultant. I worked for a consultant agency, so I had the both side. And La 27e Région came as an output of this trajectory. I thought that being inside was not enough, and being in a traditional consultancy was not working either. So the idea was to create something a bit in between. Now for the informal reason. The informal reason is that when I became older, because I'm an old guy, maybe the older than of this audience, I realized that when I was young, it's because of public policies that I was able to do my to go at the university. For instance, my family had not enough, I won't get you cry, but my family had not enough money to pay me business school, etc. And then came the university where there were no fees, and I had a grant to do my my classes, etc. So, and I realized this later when I was 30. Well, I mean, everybody's bashing bureaucracy, bashing policy, but when you think about it, we need it. I mean, it has saved the life of many people. So I found it, and it's always good to have a job when you can work on your deep problems. So yeah, there is an intimate part in the reason why I'm doing this job, is that I'm a strongly promoter of government, and this is not always popular in many countries, including in my country, where there is a lot of bashing of bureaucracy. But I'm part of the one that say that we need more political policy, we need more public policies in the future. We don't need less, we need better for sure, but we must be careful not to bash administration.
Thanks,
So,
Stefan.
per informal.
Perfect. And we're just going to stick with that question. So, Carolyn, why do you do what you do?
So a little similar, actually, in that I grew up with a mum and a sister, and my dad had incredibly poor mental health as I was growing up, and so we had a period of time in my childhood where we were homeless, and we lived in state housing, and it was not an easy life for my mum in particular. But what my sister and I both had was we had just the most amazing mum, who, regardless of the sort of material things we did or didn't have, we had sort of her unconditional love, and we had a great support network that existed around her. And that's why my sister and I have been able to do what we do and be as functional as we are. But there are so many people that just don't have that. And we always talk about sort of our network of pretend aunties and uncles. Everyone we call auntie and uncle that's not really our auntie and uncle, but they feel like your auntie and uncle. Like, every child should have that. Every child should have those aunties and uncles, and they meant the world to me growing up. So I thought I would help create that by going into government when I left university, and I worked in South Australia's child protection or child welfare system for over 10 years. And after 10 years, I removed more children from their families than any person would care to remember. And at every level, from a frontline practitioner through to then a senior executive member, I ran out of things to tell people. And effectively, we ended up feeling like a child removal service. And we just lost our ability to, and I lost my ability to see the good in people and to see what was possible. And so the reason I work at Taxi and the reason I do this work now is because I believe, and I choose to believe, that in everyone there is a remarkable asset and wisdom, and our job as social innovators needs to be to learn how to unlock the wisdom and potential of people. And if we can do that, we can truly build a great society and an opportunity for everyone to live their best life. And so I similarly go into bat for government quite often because I spent 10 years there, and I constantly hear, the system is broken, the system is broken. Actually, the system's not broken. It's doing exactly what it's asked to do generally. It's just no longer what people want or need. So how do we build the systems, the policy that really respond to the 21st century issues and challenges of what people want and need?
Thanks, Carolyn. And can I just say, when I first met Carolyn, and she'd been seconded from government to work in an innovation agency in Australia, and I remember Carolyn saying to me at a conference, "What is everyone talking about? All this innovation stuff? No idea. I'm not going to do that." 10 years later, she's running it. Suryani, why do you do what you do?
Actually, we kind of fell into it because 3 of us who kind of started Think City, we were actually working in the government investment arm, which is like the Khazanah, which is like Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund. So we were actually supposed to be bankers, investment bankers, but we were more like social and political activists, and we were talking like that. And I think that's why they kind of like, let's see what we can do with all this passion for changing. And the 3 of us who started Think City as a subsidiary of Khazanah, we were really interested on how we could change the power structure in Malaysia, because the way things are done are always top down, and we could see that it wasn't working. There was a lot of cities in Malaysia, and we could see in the region as well, that were suffering from urban decay. It doesn't work for people. The local governments are not even, the mayors are not even elected. It's appointed, and most of the time it's politically appointed, and that produces like the worst results for people on the ground, because they don't listen to people. So we wanted to change that, and we were figuring out, how do we change that? We can't change that from like an investment arm. So in a way, Think City, was created as like one of the hearts of the investment arm. So we work with our heart first, as well as intellect, rather than looking at, okay, this is how much money we have, let's kind of put it to get them to maximize returns. So, and we got like Muhammad Yunus to come and talk to us as well as people like Charles Landry, who did Creative Cities. And so we were very inspired by what they were doing. And so Think City was created because as like almost like a social enterprise kind of a structure whereby we can change people's lives with the amount of funding that we have, even though it's small. But that's when we realized, like, you don't have to have huge funding to kind of change lives. There's a really like a big power of small things. So that's so it was our passion for changing the whole structure of decision making, as well as redistributing resources to the people and bring more decision making to the people on the ground so that we can improve lives. That's how Think City was started, and that's motivated us, and we saw much better results.
Thank you.